Right, hi, everybody. So my area of focus is evictions and education, specifically in the city of North Charleston, South Carolina. So to introduce my topics, I wanted to include these two graphics that I pulled from Eviction Lab. And so what Eviction Lab is, it's a study that was done in 2016 by Princeton University, and they looked at evictions all around the country, and they found that the city of North Charleston has the highest rate of evictions nationwide. And so, through the College of Charleston, my education here, I found a passion for affordable housing. So it was shocking to learn that the city that I live 15 minutes away from is the leading in evictions nationwide. So I met with some community leaders around the North Charleston area who helped me hone in on a topic for my research project. And they helped me narrow down my idea to be working with these evictions in North Charleston and their connection to educational outcomes among elementary age students, because education is also my other passion I found here at the College of Charleston. So if you look at the graph at the bottom here, pulled from Eviction Lab, we see that the orange line represents North Charleston and their eviction rates throughout the years, and the gray line is the United States eviction rates. So the highest mark on the graph is in 2016, when their eviction rate was 16.5%, and that's compared to the United States rate, which was 2.34%. So to get started, I did a deep dive in the literature already done on this topic of these connections between evictions and education. I started broadly with affordable housing factors that influenced educational outcomes, and I started with and saw that disruptive moves and a child's residential stability were incredibly important for their development. I then moved into the more specifics of evictions and their consequences. I saw a lot of health-related issues that came from children being evicted, and I also focused a section on the eviction moratoriums we're seeing around the country as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and what could happen once those are lifted. I then looked for other case studies done on this topic. I looked at 4 case studies. The first 3, Milwaukee, Atlanta, and Richmond, were all done quantitatively, and so they looked at the relationships between evictions and educational outcomes. The 4th one I looked at, Kansas City, was qualitative, and that one helped influence my case study a lot, as I work much better qualitatively than quantitatively. Sorry to my previous professors who work really quantitatively, but I work better qualitatively, so I took some influence from this Kansas City case study that was done, where they conducted interviews on parents and teachers in the community to help tell the story of the city that was facing these evictions. Also, I wanted to look into the gaps in research in this field in particular, and a glaring hole I saw in the research that was being done was research done on the city with the highest rate of evictions in the country. So I took this information and I ran to make my research project. Also, to start off, I then looked at North Charleston as a case study, and I looked at some specific factors that I thought were important. So this was also pulled straight from Eviction Lab information that they collected through their study originally done in 2016. As you can see, there's that 16.5% eviction rate. Also important to note is that there were 10 evictions per day in the city of North Charleston in that year. And also on that left side, important is the 35.62% eviction filing rate. I'm going to talk about it a little bit more later, but that is due to how inexpensive it is to file for evictions in the city. Another factor to kind of look at is the poverty rate being 19.17%. That's compared to the United States average of 10.5%. Also, the rent burden is another factor to look at here. So it's 32.9%, and what this means is that people on average are spending 32.9% of their income on housing, and the Department of Housing and Urban Development defines affordable housing as only spending 30% of your income on your housing plus utilities. So we see that the people of North Charleston are simply spending too much money to be housed. Also important are the racial makeup of the city. So we can see that the city of North Charleston is about 37% white population, about 48% African American, and around 10% Hispanic or Latinx population. So all of these factors kind of combine to help show these connections in this city in particular. Also, in the case study of North Charleston, I looked at the education system. So while it is important to note that not every school in North Charleston is underperforming, the majority of them are. And through my research, these 2 elementary schools were brought up the most and talked about, so I wanted to do a deep dive into them, and I thought they were a good representation of the elementary schools in North Charleston. So North Charleston Elementary as well as Chicora Elementary School are both in the bottom 50% of South Carolina schools. For test scores, the proficiency for math in North Charleston Elementary is 19% compared to the state average of 45%, and the proficiency in math for Chicora is only 8%. For North Charleston Elementary, the proficiency in reading is 16% compared to the state average of 45%, and Chicora Elementary School's proficiency in reading is only 4%. They both ranked in the top 1% of South Carolina schools for the highest percentage of students, eligible for free lunch, and North Charleston Elementary School is 91% minority students, which are primarily Black students, and Chicora Elementary School is 99% minority students, primarily Black students also. So through my literature review and my case study of North Charleston, I honed in on a research question. So how do the overlaps of evictions and educational outcomes among elementary age students present themselves in North Charleston, South Carolina? So this was a qualitative exploratory study done to add more context to the already existing research on the topic of evictions and education. In order to answer this question, I conducted interviews of community leaders in the North Charleston area, in particular those that are working with either of these topics and trying to make a difference in the community. So the interviews did consist of nonprofit leaders, leaders in education and housing, as well as elected officials, and they all told stories of their experiences working in this community and how evictions and education are playing a role there. So I know there's a lot of words on the slides, but bear with me. So through my findings, I found some common themes that were mentioned. And so starting off, we talked a lot about the faults of the education system, and they brought up primarily the issue of transiency rates in the North Charleston district. So what that means, it's the students that would leave in the middle of the year and have to change schools. They have to start at another school. The students are losing that consistency, the teachers are having to learn new students, and their classmates are having to adjust as well, so it affects a lot of people involved. Also, I thought an important story to kind of mention here that was told to me through talking about the education system was when Volvo came to the Charleston area to make a plant here. They mentioned that if they'd known what they know now about the education system in this area, they wouldn't have come. So then we moved on to talk about faults of the housing system, and simply enough, housing just is not affordable in the city of North Charleston. And so when asked about the Eviction Lab data, one of the nonprofit leaders mentioned, North Charleston's not the top of anyone's list. And the Eviction Lab shined a harsh spotlight on a city a lot of people just don't talk about that much. So then I moved on to factors that were related to education and evictions. So racial disparities were one of them. One of the officials said the school district really hasn't worked for a long time for Black and low-income students in our neighborhood that they work in. And from stories that I heard regarding racism in the schools, it was evident to see that this was true. Also, poverty levels play a big role as well. One of the leaders stated that the communities that we serve had the highest concentration of child poverty in South Carolina. So we see that that's important, as we also see the 19.17 poverty level. And finally, the eviction filing price is important. So one of them said it costs almost nothing to file for an eviction in North Charleston, and that's true. It costs $40 to file for an eviction in the city of North Charleston, and that's compared to cities with upwards of $100 to $200 to file for an eviction. So landlords have started using it as an enforcement mechanism to get people to pay their rent, and evictions become a first case scenario rather than a last case scenario. So then I put some connections between evictions and education, and two major themes came out of it, and that's consistency, which goes back to those transiency rates. All of the leaders that I talked with mentioned how important consistency is for a child's life and their development. And so staying in the same schools, staying in the same neighborhood, making these connections throughout the years is incredibly important for them. Also, chronic stress was another factor involved in this connection. So one of the leaders who faced an eviction themselves when they were a young child mentioned, when you're faced with an eviction, you're facing the potential to be homeless. You're facing a situation where you may not have a roof over your head, and that can be very, very detrimental to a student who's in school and having to wonder where they're going to lay their head the next day. So then they mentioned a couple of ways that things that could be done to help fix this issue in the city of North Charleston. One of them is the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which was actually put on the ballot last November and unfortunately didn't pass in this area, but that would allocate money to affordable housing in the city. Another way is to look at this as with a community first model. And so one of the officials or one of the elected officials mentioned, if we're going to address the issue, then the intended beneficiaries of our work need to be right alongside us. And finally, simply raising the price to evict in the city would be a way to stop evictions so frequently happening. So in conclusion, I wanted to talk a bit about the future research that could be done in this field. While my study was very specific to the city of North Charleston, people could replicate this study or similar studies in other cities and help shine lights in other places that are also struggling with these evictions and educational outcomes. And so now why this study? So the intersection between evictions and education is extremely important in understanding poverty as a whole in the United States. And I think housing and education are the two most important aspects of a person's life, and it creates a solid foundation for them to continue on a good path. But most importantly, I think North Charleston deserved to have their voice heard. And so this study helped add to the existing research to elevate the voices, the wisdom, and the knowledge of community leaders working, living, and serving in this community, and to shine a light on North Charleston for all of us to see. So thank you.